Get a screen share going here. Make sure that I'm recording. And we'll dig in. Oh yeah, we're definitely recording. Brilliant. Cool. So what I want to talk about today is sessions and cookies. And sessions and cookies is like a concept about what our servers and our clients can do. We're going to explore what sessions and cookies provide for us along the lines of building this app, which is called Rails Quest. Rails Quest is a trivia app. It has questions and answers pre-seeded into it. I've already done the seeding and stuff. We're going to be able to see in the controller whether somebody's answered correctly or not. And the problem that we're going to run into fairly quickly is the limitation of our HTTP request response cycle. So maybe like as in terms of review, we can review some terms, right? Request response cycle refers to a client making a request. Client speaks a request that the server listens for. Server speaks back with a response the client was waiting for. And after that happens, it's kind of like the server just goes back to zero. In like athletics, you might refer to like a ready stance if somebody's like playing infield in baseball and they have like their knees kind of crouched and their hands are up and ready to go. The server is kind of always ready to respond to a given request, right? But the server doesn't necessarily know what's going on in between requests. This is why HTTP is what we call a stateless protocol. We don't need to maintain any state whatsoever on the server about previous requests. So far, we've spent about 2 weeks writing controllers. One thing that we've never done is implement like a server-side back button, right? We've never made an array of URLs that the user has visited previously. We haven't really kept track of what kind of user there is, because the server's whole job is to just let a request come in that goes to a certain URL with a certain action, maybe having some certain params, and the server does certain work which we've planned for that server to do. And then the server just sits there and gets ready to respond to the next URL and method pattern with a route action and does whatever work you've programmed it to do. Server doesn't have memory, right? It doesn't know. I think about an analogy of like a real server in a place, like if I went into a coffee shop, right? The person's not going to remember how many times I've gone to that coffee shop. So today is going to be about how can we get the server to remember, right? If I was at a coffee shop and I needed to remember something about a customer's visit count, that's kind of why I might give them like a punch card, right? And if you get 10 punches, you get a free coffee, and that's how I can keep track of how many times you've been here before. It's the client's or the customer's responsibility to kind of keep that punch card with them at most coffee shops, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about allegorically, at least today. Our punch card is a cookie. And what is a cookie? Cookie, Wikipedia. I don't want the cookie in Wikipedia. What if I said like cookie web? That's probably going to get me something else. HTTP cookie. That's what I want to know about. A cookie is just data, right? So like if I'm a server at a coffee shop and my goal is to know about people's previous visits instead of just my normal server behavior, which is listen to a request, listen to the size of the request, pour a cup of that size per the thing that was requested. It's a tall venti latte, right? Or whatever. I don't know sizes of coffees. But in any case, the user needs to hold on to their own awareness of how many times they've been there, and then they can give it to me. So a cookie is this same kind of thing. We let the client, we let the computer that has the browser that makes the request hold on to a certain piece of information that's coded to that server. And then whenever a request is sent to the server, it sends along this small piece of information. What we're going to deal with this week are the most important authentication cookies, and this is how a user is logged in, right? When I go to GitHub, for example, I have a cookie living in my browser. I don't know exactly where it lives in my browser, but I know that part of how my browser works is that when I travel to github.com, my browser knows that the domain is github.com, and stored locally on my machine is some sort of cookie. It's like a little text file, and you could think of it almost as a hash inside of that text file. If you're familiar with the YAML format, like it might be something like that, like a kind of special language in a text file used to only match keys to values, right? So somewhere in this hash file that's connected to the GitHub domain is information about what we'd call my session with GitHub. And currently my session is open, right? I've got my little profile picture up here. I can see that I'm logged in. If I look behind the scenes, Command Option I to open up my browser inspector, and then I want to tool around a little bit. Not in the console, I don't need to run JavaScript. Not in Elements, I'm not really concerned with the HTML or CSS that's running on the page. What I want to know about is on the Application tab. And here in the Application tab, we have something called cookies. And here we have the cookie that my browser knows about for this domain, github.com. It's important to remember that my computer is holding on to this information. So this information is sent to GitHub every single time that I make a request to the GitHub server. Part of the information that I'm sending to GitHub includes like which username I have and what my device is and if I'm currently logged on. Maybe this information gets expired, like maybe that some of this is encoded and means like some expiration time. Maybe it never expires. This is something called a user session, which probably has more information that GitHub needs to know to display my information on the page. I can't really see what's here though, because the value here is encrypted, right? There might be a hash, there could be a string, but they've done something to it with like number math that I don't have access to. Their server probably knows the reverse number to apply to this with math to turn it into a readable value, but I don't get to access the session. It's GitHub's session object that it's using to track me. So because of this object that lives here in my cookie, every time I make a request to github.com, I'm sending this stuff. I'm sending this text to the server, and the server is reading it and calculating stuff based on it, and then it sends a response. Here's the weird thing with cookies. When the response is sent from a server, the response itself can rewrite the cookie that's on my machine. That's how this cookie got here in the first place, right? Let's see what happens if I delete this cookie. Let's go right click. Or if I just click delete, nope, sorry, my bad. Name, github.com, cookies, learn more. Sorry, with my screen partially obscured, I'm trying to make sense of the buttons that I have available to me. Click on that, there we go. The little no smoking sign seems to have cleared out all of the GitHub stuff. So now if I refresh, I'm not logged into GitHub anymore, right? Because I sent a new request to GitHub, but the cookies that were on my browser were no longer there. So the new request that I sent went out cookieless. The GitHub didn't know what session was there because there was no session there. So GitHub is now responding as though I was a user without a session at all. If I click here and I go to sign in, I should be able to sign back into GitHub pretty quickly. You could see even that the cookie repopulated with some information the first time I went back to the page. That's because like most of these sites like are going to store some information about your machine, whether or not you're actually signed in as a user or not. They want to know what kind of device you have. Is it an iPad? Is it a laptop? What kind of operating system are you using? What country are you browsing from? What kind of ads? What kind of language are you using? That kind of stuff. Cool. So I've got my cookies back because part of me logging in told GitHub to give me a session again and to set that for me. Sorry. On the way, they'll be here in a couple days. Can you ask Mom that question, please? Thank you. Sorry, my kiddo is snack hungry right now. So we've got this cookie. It lives on the server first, right? The server tells the computer that requested to it, whatever client made the request, hey, I'm gonna send you a response, but I'm also gonna send you back some cookie information so that you can give me that information every time you make new requests. And then every time that client makes new requests, it's sending that cookie information that's stored locally. So conceptually, that's what we're dealing with. Apologies. Here's my groceries. Conceptually, what we're dealing with is this thing that lives on the client's computer. But practically, we just need to figure out what are we going to do in Rails and where in order to manage this cookie object in a way that is useful for us. So now I want to get into this quiz app proper and figure out how this thing works and how it doesn't work right now. And then we can kind of explore and use the Rails session keyword to write keys and values to the user's cookie. So let's try this. Rails S. I've already bundled. Oh, but you know what? I didn't do any sort of database stuff. So let me shut back down and do database stuff. I created an alias in my bash profile called YOLO. It creates a database, it migrates, it seeds So this should give us our questions, our answers. Cool. So now I'm going to spin up the server and we'll see what this looks like. In my code base, by the way, if I don't know my way around somebody's app, I can always start by looking at config routes. Get random question, 2 responses new. Get random question. I bet you if I just go to /random question, that's going to be the URL because it's right next to a get. Let's try that. Localhost 3K. Yeah. Oh, it's taking a second. Let me make sure my server's up and running okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't catch that. Thank you very much. Are cookies shared between different browsers? Generally, they're not, right? The cookie is like generally going to be browser specific. If contextually, if I'm thinking of when I go and install like Firefox on a computer that only had like Internet Explorer or Safari before that, usually as part of like setting up that second browser on your machine, you get asked, do you want to transport all of your bookmarks and cookies and settings? So yeah, they're asking like the text files that are associated with this one specific browser and its connections to domains. Do you want a copy of those too? And by default, I don't think that they're going to share them. But if you decide to share them, then you would find that, yeah, you could be logged in to GitHub on a second browser, the same as you were on that first browser. But for example here, this is my GitHub. If I go to GitHub from here, I am logged into GitHub because it's got my cookie, right? But if I go to Safari, I'm not sure if I'm logged into GitHub on Safari. I might be, but I'm not. Yeah, so my Chrome and my Safari are not sharing cookies with one another right now. So my experience with GitHub.com also depends on the browser that I'm using. The browser is the client, right? So we could think of the job of storing the cookie over time as being the client's job. The controller might generate that value for the cookie. It might be where the value begins, but whatever client the controller responded to, that's specifically where the cookie gets written to. And then multiple clients are not necessarily going to have access to that unless the browser has some sort of backup or sharing settings where cookies would automatically get sent to somewhere else. But by default, no. Yeah, they're not going to be shared between different browsers. Cool. So let's get into this quest. League of Legends, Dota 2, Smite, Heroes of the Storm, they're all part of which game genre? Now, I know for a fact that these are all MOBA games. And so I'm going to submit, and I'm going to look at the back end. If we look at the back end here, we inserted a response as we submitted. The question ID was 1. The answer ID was 1. I don't really know what that even means. I'm guessing that the first question is about this league thing. And then the answer MOBA was probably the first response. They might be shuffling the responses, which is why it wasn't at the top of the list. In any case, I made a response. And in this controller, the responses controller, it's logged correct. Let's take a look at the responses controller and see exactly where that's happening. So in app, controllers, responses controller, here's where we're puts incorrect. Every time we answer a question, we are adding a response or creating a response in the database. So it sets number correct to 0. It creates a response here. If the response question was correct, basically if my answer was the same as the question's designated correct answer, then we're going to increment our number correct and we're going to puts correct. Otherwise, we're not going to increment our number correct. We'll just puts incorrect instead. Either way, we're going to redirect toward random question. And so we started out on the random question, which was just the new page right here. I'm going to say P at random question to prove that. If we refresh here, go down and check. At random question. Cool. So this is definitely the route that we redirect back to at the end of submitting a question. Who created it? Adventure Time, Pendleton Ward. We'll submit. So now I've got 2 correct so far, and I'm feeling pretty proud of myself. Yeah, that's correct. Then it redirected back to random question. It goes to get random question, and that's our response new, which is being processed. So we're at random question. So this is the flow, right? In the controller, we first hit the create route. A response is calculated and tested, and then we give feedback, and then we redirect back to this new route where we get the opportunity to create a new response back and forth, which means that if we're trying to track number correct, right, we could probably look here and see what our number correct is. We could at least, if this was like a stateful protocol, right, if HTTP had awareness of itself in previous request response cycles, right? If my server at new was aware of the work that it had just done in create, it should be able to grab this same instance variable number correct and print it out right there. And then I'll do another one right here just to make sure that we really highlight the thing that we're looking for. Let's go back and check. Let's refresh. It's nil. Interesting. Well, you know what? I'm going to bring this code somewhere else. I'm going to bring it right where we puts correct or incorrect. We'll fix indentation because this, I don't know if it bugs you, but it bugs the heck out of me. And I think it should bug you. I've got weird double indentation too because I think that I had my tab settings different before. I'm not going to standardize it perfectly, but I am going to get this if-else correct with itself. Cool. I guess I could bring these all back too while I'm thinking about it. Cool. So the number correct increments, and then instead of saying random question, maybe we could say here correct answer. This is correct answers. I'll say yay because this was correct, and I'll say boo because this was incorrect. Just giving myself feedback everywhere. Right here, yeah, am I creating a class for users and or a game? I don't think we're there yet, Jack. I'm really just talking about what it means to be a session in Cookie yet. This lecture is not scoped at all for users and authorization. So if you're thinking about how to actually create users, create a game, put these questions and responses in the context of one game, I think that's solid. It's not what I'm digging into right now. This could be built out with that. My intent for now is to compare and contrast instance variables versus the Rails session keyword and what those things are and how those things behave, and then to also talk about the Flash keyword and how that differs from session. So that's the specific focus of the lecture. We're not going to talk about how to implement users and authentication today. We're going to talk about the underpinnings of it, and then as you start on project stuff, you'll be able to build things that have nothing to do with users throughout the day. And then tomorrow, when you're itching for users even more, then we'll talk about users. Thank you for that question. Cool. So I'm going to say correct answer. Cool. Yay and boo. And then here we have at random question. I'm going to just say at new response because that's technically what we're doing in this controller. Let's get into the flow here. Let's check out what happens to this instance variable. Now, my prediction is, because HTTP is stateless, that every time we get to a new route, we lose our instance variables. Who developed this? Sony? Pardon me. I'm going to be muting periodically until this cough subsides. Before we got that answer wrong, it said 0. Pardon me. I'm going to refresh my water. I'm going to refresh my water real quick. Apologies. Sorry about that, y'all. So, the situation at hand is we have this instance variable that only seems to be living in this one route, right? We create at number correct here. We know that it's an integer. Whether or not we increment it to a 1 or not, we lose it, right? We get to a new route because there's a redirect. Redirect means I'm the create action responding to you, client, and my response is code 300. I need you to make an immediate new GET request to where I'm telling you, and I'm telling you to go back to this new route. So the client says, okay, I'll make a new request. I'll go back to the new route. And then the server immediately forgets the client. Picture a completely burnt out barista. They see somebody walk out the door. They walk right back in the door because they forgot their wallet. And it's like, hey, how can I help you? And it's like, you just helped me. Well, I don't know. I have no memory, right? Stateless server. So we lose track of our instance variable number correct right here. It's just gone. We don't have any way to track it if we're going to track it with an instance variable back and forth across routes. So we need to do something else instead. We need to track number correct using the cookie, right? We need to create a cookie value for number correct, and we need to tell the client computer when we send this redirect response, hey, I'm going to redirect you to random question, but as part of this redirect, here is a cookie. And when you make another request, you're going to have that cookie with you this time, and then maybe we can read some information that's on the cookie. The way that cookies work is that it's the one kind of file that a server can change on the client's computer. So if I just use the keyword session here, session num correct, session is a hash. So I can set a key the same way that I would set a key in a hash. If I use this keyword session, what I'm talking to is the hash representation of the text that will be encrypted and stored on the client's computer. So the client's going to have a cookie. The cookie is going to be this like string. The string is going to get sent to the server. The server is going to decode that string into some text, and then that's going to be a hash when Ruby gets its hands on it. So this session hash, when I say session num correct equals something, when I send this redirect back to the client, I'm also saying any session values that I've set or changed are going to come back as part of my response as I redirect, and they're going to change the value of this session that's stored by the user. So every time I'm thinking of this, I could think of this as store a new value for num correct on the client computer, or on the client. I'm not going to say computer because a client in this paradigm could be anything. A client could also be like a thermostat that has been activated by a user and receives a session piece of data saying like this isn't a counterfeit thermostat, you can change temperatures with it. A client could also be an e-reader that's deciding which user account is authorized to download a given book onto it. A client could obviously be a laptop. A client could be a mobile device or an iPad or a video conferencing tool or something like that. In any case, whatever client has visited us, we're going to store a new value for number correct. And what we're going to do here is maybe say, I don't know, session num correct equals at num correct. Just to try this much. Number correct. So the next time we get a correct answer, our reward might be that we could set it into a session. If we set it into a session and redirect, then the redirect is going to point us back here, and we should be able to retrieve it right here as well. P session num correct. Let's check this flow out for a couple of steps. I'm going to close out all of my back-end stuff so that's easier to see. What was Manfred von Richthofen's nickname? I believe it was the Red Baron. I'm going to click on submit. You can see here, yay correct answers, and then we printed out the number correct under yay correct answers, right? So that's the instance variable. Then we store the instance variable in session num correct. Then after the redirect, we're going to print out the instance variable, but then we're going to also print out session. Oh no, the space. Maybe that's a problem. Let's see. Yeah, we had a server error. Wrong number of arguments. Let's try this one more time and not have a typo in it. Cool. Because I think it's going to say nil, and then it's going to say what's actually in the session. Is it New Delhi? I think it might be New Delhi. So yeah, check this out. We got a correct answer, incrementing from 0 to 1. And now look, in our response, when we redirected, we still have a nil, because instance variables just don't travel, right? Because instance variables are set and stored on the server. But this session value gets sent back as a response as part of the cookie in that response header. So now the session number correct gets persisted through different requests. This is how we can persist a notion of a user being logged in on a site. For example, we could store a user ID as a session value. And then every time somebody went to a given route, we could look up for a session user ID. And if it's present and there's a user in the database, now we've persisted a user. So anybody who's kind of looking ahead, that's kind of what happens under the hood to make that piece of it work. But for right now, let's explore more how to refactor this quiz stuff and make it even better for the user so that we can maybe show correct or incorrect and also show a running total right on the browser. So right now, When we go to this new page, let's explore one more thing. What are we actually looking at in this view for a new response? Right here we have this correct so far, and then we have this instance variable number correct. So the first thing I'd like to do is maybe say number correct equals session correct. This serves to do a couple of things for me. It sets number correct to session, and then it also sets it as an instance variable, so I should be able to see it in the view. And then also by saying p here, whatever value gets set, I'll still be able to spy on the back end. Let's see what it looks like in the browser here. If we refresh, correct so far is 1. That's great. What is the Japanese name for the final evolutionary stage? I don't know. Is it Mega? I think it might be Mega. Let's see. Probably not Mega, actually. Yeah, it was Boo. It was, no, it was incorrect. So that takes it to 0. Wait, why is that a 0? I had a 1. How did it get back down to a 0? I know that this was the Red Baron. Let's turn the 1 into a 2. Can't turn the 1 into a 2 because things keep getting reset back to the 0 in this create controller. So let's talk about this real quick. At number correct, if we reset it to 0 every time, and if we set our session based on at number correct, we're going to be setting our session back to 0 every time. We're never going to get it above 1. So let's say here that like, maybe session number correct. This is a common idiom you're going to see in Rails. I'm going to set my initial value of session number correct to be 0. But when I say or equals, what I'm saying is if you already have a value for this, just stop. Don't do anything else. Just express session number correct. That's fine. If we don't have a value for session number correct, then we move over the Boolean or and set session number correct to 0. So this way, if a given user has not had a number correct value set, it's not going to break later on down the chain. We're going to give it a default value to start with. But for every other user, as long as this is truthy, we're just going to proceed with it. So now instead of saying number correct equals number correct plus 1, let's refactor all of this to be session number correct. Something like that. Close the bracket. And then I think we can actually get rid of the session number correct stuff here. We don't really need this piece. Now when we say we're storing a new value, that happens here now when we reset the value of session num correct, right? And I suppose we could refactor this even further to say session num correct plus equals 1, but I'm going to be super explicit because this is a new term and I'm not going to try to tie it up in a lot of happy Rails Ruby syntax just now. We still have a puts correct, we still have a puts incorrect. I think that's fine. We don't need to deal with number correct anymore over here. I suppose we don't really need all of this stuff either if we're going to be able to see if we got something correct or incorrect based on a number changing. Let's see how it goes. Let's refresh. Which famous rapper is featured in Febreze? I think it's 2 Chainz. That was correct. And I can see it's correct because the 1 has now changed into a 2. So by using this or equals 0, it's able to take the session number correct and just use the previous value of 1 because 1 was truthy. It didn't need to go over the or hash or pipes in order to set a 0 into the hash. The hash just took its existing value and incremented it up further. And then it goes back here and we set our instance variable. So that's pretty cool. That's actually one of the deliverables in our README, right? Which add a feature which displays the number of questions a user has answered correctly. By the way, this is tied to the session. We can spy on the session here the same as we did in GitHub. Pardon me a second. So over here, if we take a look at our cookies, localhost 3000, because this is a Rails app with a name, you can see that Rails has conveniently created all of these named sessions based on the app name. So we have Rails Quest, that's what we're currently in. When we did Rails intro stuff, even assessment code, right? Pet shop, Rails forms REST. So anything that has like a Rails app under localhost is going to end up getting one of these sessions by default, like kind of the way that Rails is configured to work. So essentially here we have, yeah, most successful. I agree, Jack. This question is extremely, I'm definitely using, I don't know who's going to win this one. I'm going to try Congo. not the Congo apparently, right? But who cares? Who knows, right? Who's judging that? Certainly not the conquered. In any case, we have these sessions here, just like on GitHub. These sessions have values that are encrypted. So we know on the server side that we can set something called numCorrect in this session, but the client doesn't get to know that, right? Security through obscurity. We have keys that we care about knowing the names of, and we also care about other people not knowing those names. It's going to be a moot point because we don't need the client to do any calculating on it. But this very long string, this very long string, yes, this very long string here and this very long string here are both going to evaluate out to different hashes with different keys and values. You could put a key called user ID in there. You could put a key called night mode in there that's a Boolean of whether the CSS should be night mode on or off, right? Is it a desktop device? Is it a mobile device? Is the person currently logged in? What was the date of their last login? All keys that could be living in encrypted strings like this. They're just living in the session, which means if I take RailsQuest and I remove it, and then I refresh, I've lost track of correct so far, right? It's now totally set to nil because if you remember, the only place that we really set a first value for numCorrect was in the create. So before we answer the first question, we don't even have a value here. This is just a nil. But yeah, who developed Hatsune Miku? I think it was actually Sega. No, it definitely wasn't. Was it Sony? It was Sony, I think. Which of these was classified as an anime? Cory in the House, Stitch, Emperor's New School, or Hannah Montana? That's a very good question. Emperor's New School had the kind of spiky lines, but I think Stitch was more spiritually in the anime world. Yeah, I think it was Stitch. First computer length animated movie feature, I think it was Toy Story. Yeah, okay, we got one correct again. But we're able to reset by deleting these cookies, right? It's my browser that's holding on to those. Thank you very much, Yusuf. I'm going to not miss that one again next time it comes around. And it will come around again because there's not an infinite number of questions here. So the first takeaway, I think, is that I'm going to make a takeaways section here. So we have takeaways. Every new request loses all previous requests' instance variables, right? Including redirects. Because a redirect is basically just to trigger a new, redirect triggers a new request response cycle. Another takeaway is that we can use session keyword to access and set values with typical hash syntax. Next, request from that client will carry newly set session values. Can we delete session values, right? What if we wanted to penalize somebody for an incorrect answer? I think we're allowed to do that too. We could go in here in the controller. We could just reset. If you get something wrong, your score goes back to 0, right? We could say session, numCorrect. What about this? What if we just did this? If you're wrong, we're going to call session.clear. This is like hitting your session with a shotgun as opposed to a scalpel, right? I could have said session numCorrect equals nil, or I could have said session numCorrect equals 0, but I'm going to say session.clear because that's another thing that I can do if I get something wrong. Who was the stuffed lion in Bleach? Joe? No, it was not. So now I've lost everything, right? I lost my session thing. Who said let them eat cake, but maybe didn't say it at all? It's hard to say things when you got no freaking head. All right, anyways. What is the capital of India? Pretty sure it's still New Delhi. Great. So now we've got this like deep penalty, right? So if you get one wrong, you're going to clear the whole session. Another way to say this, like I said, was session numCorrect equals nil. So same rules as any other hash so far. Let's try this out. Who was previously the drummer for Nirvana? Oh, it definitely was not Taylor Hawkins. Cool, and that would reset us, right? Same as what we did before, just two different ways to do it. .clear on the whole session, or setting something to nil. Any other kind of hash delete methods that you could do on a hash, you can do on the session. So that's our next request will carry the newly set session data, and then at this point we can, thank you, at this point we can talk about the next piece, which is that sessions persist indefinitely by default. Rails has more stuff on the session about how to like expire a session. We're not going to get super deep into that. We're just going to play around with the notion of persistence for this week. And persisting indefinitely is going to be potentially an issue for us, because the other thing in our README that we wanted to do was how do we get the server to remember, add a message which tells the user whether or not they got the last answer correct, right? So here we have puts correct, puts incorrect. What if we had a session thing? Session feedback. Right? We're going to tell the user some immediate feedback on whether they were right or wrong. And then here we could set feedback. Feedback equals session feedback. So now in my new, we could do a big feedback H1 at the top. I'm going to make it, actually it's going to be purple no matter what. Cool. Then we'll add our feedback. Okay, so we got our feedback piece here. Let's see what it looks like. Correct so far. Okay, what's the name of Chris's brother and everybody hates Chris? I don't know, is it Jerome? No, that's incorrect. Cool, it says incorrect. That's good. Let's see, we guessed Congo before. I'm going to say Ethiopia this time. That was correct. Fantastic. Which best-selling toy caused riots? I'm pretty sure it was Cabbage Patch Kids. That was also correct. Cool. So it says correct. This is really good news, right? Super excited about that. Here's the problem, though. If we go back here, localhost 3000/questions, a random question. So this I like. Correct so far too. It's nice to come back to a game and see my running score, right? It's nice to come back to something I've been working on and see the progress persisted. This, I think, was supposed to be a little bit more immediate feedback. Imagine that a week passed between the last time I visited the site and now it says correct. I don't even remember what the question was. This isn't very helpful feedback for me anymore. What I'd like to have is some magical Rails session that is designed to only last for one more request response cycle before getting auto-deleted, something that just kind of flashes in front of the user and then disappears. What we're talking about is literally called Flash in Rails. And Flash is just a session hash that you can use that will also have a counter that applies to every key that you set for it. And then if that counter gets ticked past one more request, as it auto ticks per request response cycle, then it expires and it no longer shows up. So all I literally need to do here is, instead of session feedback, change these to Flash feedback. Flash is a hash just like session is, except stuff that lives in Flash only lasts one more request response. So if I refresh the page right now, that correct had already shown. It's gone now. Actually, it hasn't gone. I believe I've actually still got a key called session feedback there. Let's try that out. If we say p session feedback, let's refresh the page, check the back end. When we go to our route, yeah, it still says correct right there, right? So it still knows what session feedback is, but now I'm rendering something called Flash feedback, and we'll get to watch how this behaves slightly differently. When was the iPhone released? 06? No, I'm going to say 06, but I'm pretty sure it's wrong. Yeah, I think it was 07. What's the largest organ of the human body? It's the skin. Cool, so now we're getting some feedback. That says correct. Let's make the same mistake we made before. I'm going to go and refresh here. Now check that out. It still says the number I have correct from over here. If I refresh here, that's another request response that I made when I refreshed. So the Flash only lasts one more page. Flash is designed for things like, congratulations, your account was created. Or, thank you, your receipt will be emailed to you. Things that you might want to pop up on a page just because you're like heading out of a form redirect. Ooh, you know what else we could use Flash for potentially? Up until now, before we've known about sessions in Flash, the best way that we've been able to display errors for something is to render that form again on the post route or on the update route. But because of Flash, if you have a form that only has one or two small inputs, stuff that you wouldn't mind putting into a Flash and sending to the next request, you could potentially keep things 100% restful and always redirect out of your post. Sometimes you're redirecting to a created thing. Sometimes you're redirecting back to the form and putting error messages up in the Flash. For now, the important takeaway with Flash versus Session is that Session will persist indefinitely, whereas a Flash is only going to persist for the next request response cycle. Flash and whatever key name. Also a way to set and a Flash will just persist for one request response. So in terms of the keywords that we need to remember, right? We've got Session and we've got Flash now. Under the hood, what each of those things are doing is when we set that value in the server and the server responds with some HTML, part of that response, in the header of the response, is going to exist this session information encoded so that the browser is able to store that at a place that it holds for the Rails domain that we're in. So look, localhost 3000, and then it'll name it based on the app sessions cookies in this case. Or sorry, and the name is going to come from Rails Quest, which I think is the title of the page, perhaps. Let me check one thing real quick. I believe this is where the session might be getting its name from, is the title of the page itself, because that's like I think that's the tag that it reads, but that's just a personal guess. I might be wrong on that one. In any case, the mechanics that we've talked about are that if we want to pass information from controller method to controller method, we haven't really had an easy way to do that. Instance variables haven't worked, but we have this session hash that does work. The session hash is going to be used starting tomorrow to hold on to things like user IDs once they've logged in. If you're building a project that needs a user and you're not sure about user login, what I would recommend you do is create a user, put that user in the database, make note of that user's ID, and then when you first log in, go to a route like maybe the index route that's going to set something like session user ID to whatever that user is, equals user.first.id, right? If you've got something like this, then you'll be able to use session user ID to find any user in previous or in later on routes, any user that had previously set their ID. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the mechanics of setting a session user ID based on a user being created, right? And then using that session user ID to authenticate a user and also to authorize that user. And we'll talk about that in more detail tomorrow. I'm wondering for now if we have any more questions about sessions and the Flash hash versus the session hash, mental model questions about like how does it all come together, where the information is being kept. I'm just kind of curious, what questions do folks have? Sure. Mm-hmm. Yes. We're going to go over that tomorrow right after lunch specifically. And if you want to check in on a one-to-one today, we can definitely go over that after lecture for sure. Cool. Yeah, that's a nice spoiler alert too. We're going to finally get into this helpers folder and like you can create a helper for a given type of controller, a different kind of model. And this is going to be where we end up putting in methods that say like, hey, how can we quickly check which user is logged in? How can we quickly check if a user is logged in at all? And how can we automatically redirect somebody who's not logged in to the login page so that they can start using our app the right way? Kind of behaviors that you're used to seeing on the web. That's what we'll get into tomorrow. So today what we've covered is really the underpinnings of this new part of the web We might not have thought about it before now, but this problem of like persisting things across multiple routes as though they were an instance variable becomes a huge problem when you don't want all of your email app users to have to log in every single time they go to a page to sign in and check out their email. You'd love to have somebody go back to your Gmail or their whatever else and just be able to see that their stuff is in front of them, and you want that to happen for your app as well. So that's the piece that I had as far as sessions and cookies. I'm going to move on right now to talk about project stuff a little bit. And I think what I want to start with is this Slack message that I sent to myself. Sorry. And GIFs. Sure, that's a good GIF. We're going to hang there until I get back to my own thing. Yeah. So here is my idea. I just sketched out this idea of what an asynchronous pitch might look like. So if you've spent some time writing things down and wanted to pitch your project, this is the kind of like level of detail that I'm hoping for in a pitch. I've got like a really general description of an app. I've got some listing of models that I need to have, as well as the attributes that those models will need to have. I have not glossed over foreign keys, right? I don't just want to say that like, oh yeah, there's going to be a story and a genre and a story genre and you get it. Because here's the thing, I do get it, but I want to make sure that we both get it and that you get it on the level that it's going to help you to build the project, right? So I want to see what your plan is, and I want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success with your foreign keys lined up and talking through some of the key relationships in your application. And then finally, talking through some user stories, right? And I actually don't know how much detail a given user story needs to have for your own purposes, but I feel like in combination of my first opening sentence and like the clear kind of specific things that I'm trying to do, I think that these user stories are actually fleshed out enough for me to say, yes, I have full CRUD functionality in this application. In at least one place, I'm creating users, I'm creating stories, I'm editing sections, I'm deleting sections of a story. Finally, like the keystone feature, I can view a story with all of the sections put together and showing everybody who contributed. That's like my big read finale thing at the end. So as you're working through projects and you're setting your intentions for things, feel free to DM myself and or Derek, or set up a Zoom call to talk through your project pitch. But essentially, we've got project guidelines. They're the same type of guidelines as what we had in Mod 1, actually. We still want to have multiple models talking to each other. We still want to have like some complex model relationships, get a many-to-many involved in there. And we need to have CRUD functionality using active record things. We still have the notion of like the MVP skateboard. Let me see if I can find that picture somewhere. Where we're not actually trying to build the whole car, right? Like from scratch. We have this notion that as we're building, we're always going to be building things that work as they are, right? Which means we haven't yet figured out user login, right? So you can build an app assuming that no users exist, that you are the only user of that app. If something needs to be coded in as a user ID before you implement users, maybe your MVP hard codes in a user ID. And like I said, only has one user that's even able to use the app. And everybody who uses the app is like that person. Is it done? Is it a car? It is not. But it's also not a chassis sitting there without an engine. That would be closer to a scooter or a bicycle, because I've still got the ability to do some user-centric things, but just not in the sense of trying to overplan and get every single piece final draft ready sequentially going through it. I think it's much more likely that you're going to have a feature that looks kind of incomplete, right? Because it doesn't have all of the details fleshed out, as opposed to having a feature that is going to be perfect, but it's not working at all right now, because another feature that's going to be perfect and not working at all right now has to be attached to it. We want to avoid that pattern where we have a Frankenstein app where on the last day nothing really works and you're hoping that a lot of glue is going to put it together. Much nicer to like end the day tomorrow with running Rails code that gets at least one like read feature done, so that you can say like, yeah, I'm off the ground. But in order to code like that tomorrow, we need to plan like that today. So I think that our main goals going through this project are going to be, let me see if I can find I had a window for it. Move this communication bar somewhere else so that I can get it. Sure. Oh yeah, we got a bunch of one-on-one signups for the project mode week. It's a brand new week, so I've got this new tab here if anybody wants to check in on projects. And then we've also got guided. Yes. find the GitHub real quick, pull the project up, just so we can peek at it. Oh, but you know what? Make sure this is the right one. Project, ideation, yes. So I like these examples and ideas. I think that, so we're talking about 5 models consisting of at least one relationship. I think that it's okay to actually have 4 models potentially. It really depends on what kind of user stories you're coming up with. I don't want to try to shoehorn a 5th model in. For a lot of your model domains, that user model might itself become a 5th model, or a join table technically counts as a model. So if you add like tagging to something and it's a many-to-many, you're really adding 2 tables. You're adding the tags table, and then you're adding the join for whatever you have to the tags table. So I wouldn't overthink or try to like shoehorn your plan into this particular count. I would rather get really passionate about a specific idea that you'd like to build an app around. And then when you pitch, if you're not sure you have enough models or complexity, I can totally help you, or Derek can totally help you figure out how to ratchet it up a little bit. And then I would recommend paying close attention to this piece. Even though we're not physically immersed in a space right now, having some place that you can physically draw things out, whether it's on the web, whether it's on an actual piece of paper, or if you have a whiteboard at home. I think that drawing out your plans today is probably the most important piece of advice that I can give. Because then if you're not sure if something's going to work and you want to ask about it, you can show us some visual understanding of your plan, and that can help us to understand where you're going even better and faster. User stories should be as specific as they need to be to give you confidence that you know exactly what feature you need to build and that you know what route is going to happen in order to make that feature work. You should be able to like map your work to some sort of CRUD functionality, and you should also be able to map it to like some kind of RESTful controller in action that lives in your model domain. Visual elements, you might be thinking more about CSS or images in this project because it is living in the browser, and actually sketching out some mockups or some wireframes can be super helpful. Once you've got a really solid understanding of what it is you want to build and who you're building, what it is you're going to build, then please come to us with a project pitch. I will let the cohort know one by one if anybody has not told me yet if they're going to be soloing or pairing on the project, so that everybody can let us know the decisions on that ASAP. That would be awesome. Then once we know who else pairing, we're going to be able to pair people off and announce that. Soloists, if you're soloing, you can go ahead and get to work on this at the moment. And I think the goal for today is to get to a place in your planning that you're ready to pitch a project so that you can spend tonight through like Thursday night building the actual project out. And the goal here is not to add a million features on, but to have a couple of good features that are MVP that start the app nice and solid, and then to move on from that to maybe add 1 or 2 more features that are in your icebox by the end of the work. I think that code that is complete and really nicely polished is probably better than like a dozen half completed features. So definitely let smoothly running code be your measure of success. As far as all this stuff, what questions do we have regarding projects for the week? Cool. Check my chat. I might have moused over the chat and missed a question just now. No, cool. Well, for now, if there are no questions, I think that the next thing to do is, if you have not announced to myself and Derek if you're going to be soloing or pairing, please do that ASAP. Next, Derek and myself will let anybody who is unassigned with pairs know who their pair is assigned with, or if they are unassigned and we need to think about something else. So basically, between now and 11:30, my main focus is going to be making sure that myself and Derek and that everybody knows who am I working with on my project, if anyone, and then everybody is going to be able to comfortably dig into their projects. And then I think the goal for the afternoon is, by the end of the day, you want to have pitched to myself or Derek what your plan is, what your user story is, what your models and relationships are going to be, and maybe try to get that first migration or 2 written so that you know I've got code on the page, it's there, I don't have to start tomorrow with a blank slate, I've got a plan and I'm moving with it. Cool. And I guess for now, I'll just wait on people to let us know on solo repair status. And if you have any questions, please chime in with those throughout the morning. And also feel free to grab any one-on-one slots as needed throughout project week this week. We've got a whole bunch. I think there's technically enough for everybody in the cohort to check in with me personally 2 times, and that's just my schedule. Derek's going to have his own availability this week as well. Cool, cool. Thanks so much for digging in through this lecture, and tomorrow we're going to take these sessions and cookies to a new level. For now, welcome to Project Week. Super stoked, because now we get to build web apps because we're web developers. Take care, web developers. I'll catch you at the next one.